They think I returned to clean up their mess like some failed maid, but they have no idea I hold the only code to the hell my grandmother left specifically for them. When that safe door finally swings open, it will reveal far more than just $2 million. It will trigger the absolute collapse of their entire empire of lies. My name is Imogen Brightwell. In my line of work, patience is not just a virtue, it is the currency of survival. I was standing in the center of my climate-controlled studio in Tribeca. The air hummed with the low, steady vibration of the HEPA filtration system. Under the magnifying lamp, my hands moved with the precision of a neurosurgeon. I was not saving a life, but I was saving something that cost significantly more than most human lives. Before me lay a fragile, crumbling letter written by a founding father in 1789. The ink was iron gall, acidic and biting, eating its way through the rag paper like a slow-moving cancer. My job was to stop the rot. I dipped a micro swab into a solution of calcium phytate. The movement was barely a breath. My world was silence and focus. I had spent the last decade building this sanctuary, a fortress of solitude where I restored the broken treasures of the ultra-wealthy. To the world outside these soundproof walls, I was a ghost. To the auction houses in London and the private collectors in Dubai, I was simply the restorer. They did not know my face. They only knew my price, and my price was exorbitant. Then, the silence shattered. My phone buzzed against the steel surface of the workbench. It was not the dedicated business line that rang for seven-figure contracts. It was the personal burner phone I kept buried in the bottom drawer, the one that only 3 people had the number for. I stripped off my nitrile gloves, the snap of the latex echoing in the room, and looked at the screen. Beatrice, the name sat there, glowing in the dim light. I had not spoken to my mother in 5 years. I stared at it, my pulse remaining terrifyingly steady. A normal daughter might feel panic or joy. I felt the cold, hard calculation of a soldier hearing the first mortar shell of a new war. I swiped the green icon and held the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I knew she would not wait for it. Imogen, her voice came through, sharp and tinny, lacking any of the warmth usually associated with maternal recognition. It was a voice that sounded like tearing silk. You need to come home, today. I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms over my chest. Hello, Mother. It has been a long time. Don't start with the melodrama, she snapped. I do not have time for your sensitivity. We are selling Blackwood Manor. The market is turning, and the realtor says we need to list it before the winter freeze sets in properly. The attic is a disaster. It is filled with 50 years of junk, and I need it cleared out by the end of the week. I looked around my studio. On the far wall hung a framed thank you note from the curator of the Louvre. On my desk sat a contract I had been reviewing earlier that morning. You want me to clean the attic? I repeated, my voice flat. Well, I certainly cannot do it, Beatrice said, her tone implying that manual labor was a disease she might catch through the phone line. And do not expect Serafina to help. Your sister is incredibly busy right now. She is chairing the committee for the Winter Solstice Gala. It is a massive responsibility. Imogen, she is networking with the most important families in Newport. She cannot be expected to ruin her manicure hauling dusty boxes. There it was, the old, familiar song. Serafina, the golden child, was too precious for dust. Serafina, who had never worked a real day in her life, was busy. I, on the other hand, was the expendable resource. I see, I said. So Serafina is busy being social, and you are calling me because you have nothing better to do, Beatrice cut in, her voice dripping with that casual cruelty she mastered years ago. Let's be honest, Imogen, it is not like you have a career to worry about. You are likely just tinkering with your little arts and crafts in some basement apartment. This will give you something productive to do. Besides, I might let you keep some of the old clothes if you find anything that fits you, though I doubt anything of quality would. I closed my eyes for a second. letting the insult wash over me. It did not sting anymore. It just confirmed that nothing had changed. She thought I was still the 23-year-old girl who fled in the night with a backpack and a broken heart. She thought I was destitute. She thought I was a failure. "Fine," I said, pitching my voice to sound defeated, smaller. "I suppose I can get away. I do not have much going on this week." "Good," she said. "Don't take the highway during rush hour. I don't want you arriving late and waking me up. Be here by 6. The line went dead. She didn't say goodbye. She never did. I placed the phone back on the metal table. The silence returned, but the energy in the room had shifted. I looked down at the 1789 letter. It was valuable. Yes, but it was not urgent. I walked over to my desk and picked up the thick document I had been reading before she called. It was a proposal from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They wanted me to head the restoration of a newly discovered Renaissance codex. The fee attached to the project was $500,000. I picked up a pen and wrote a single word across the top page, "Declined." Then I dropped it into the shredder. The machine whirred, eating the $500,000 offer in seconds. Beatrice thought I was coming home because I had nothing better to do. She had no idea that I was clearing my schedule of a fortune just to step back into her world. I wasn't going back to clean an attic. I was going back for the safe. I walked to the oversized mirror in the corner of the studio. The woman staring back at me looked expensive. My silk blouse was tailored. My trousers were Italian wool, and my haircut alone cost more than the car Beatrice drove. This woman could not go to Newport. This woman would raise questions. This woman would make Serafina jealous and Beatrice suspicious. I went to the closet and pushed aside the rows of designer blazers. In the back, kept in a plastic garment bag like a costume for a play, were my Imogen the Failure clothes. I stripped off the silk and wool. I pulled on a pair of faded, ill-fitting jeans that I had bought at a thrift store years ago. I put on a gray t-shirt with a small, stubborn stain on the collar. I tied my hair back in a messy bun, pulling out strands to make it look unkempt. I scrubbed the makeup from my face until I looked pale and tired. When I looked in the mirror again, the successful restorer was gone. The invisible daughter stared back. I left the studio, locking the heavy steel door with a biometric scan. I did not head to the underground parking garage where my matte black Audi RS7 was parked. Instead, I took a cab to a storage facility in Queens. Inside Unit 42 sat a rusted, dented Ford pickup truck I had bought for $2,000 cash specifically for this day. It smelled of stale tobacco and wet dog, a smell that clung to the fabric of the seats. I tossed my duffel bag into the passenger seat and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and finally roared to life with a noise that sounded like a dying animal. It was perfect. It was the sound of desperation. The drive to Newport took 3 hours. I drove the speed limit, letting the aggressive New York traffic flow around me. As I crossed the bridge onto Aquidneck Island, the landscape shifted. The grimy concrete of the city gave way to manicured lawns, high hedges, and the scent of salt money. Newport was a town built on the concept of exclusion. It was a place where people spent millions to make sure other people knew they were not welcome. I navigated the truck through the winding streets, passing the tourist traps and heading toward the Ocean Drive area, where the old money rotted in peace. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the water, and then I saw it. Blackwood Manor rose from the cliffside like a jagged tooth. It was a Victorian monstrosity, a sprawl of turrets and gables that had once been imposing but was now merely sad. The gray shingles were warping, peeling away from the structure like dead skin. The iron gates were rusted shut, forcing me to get out and physically shove them open, the metal screaming in protest. I drove up the long, cracked driveway. The gardens, once my grandmother's pride and joy, were overgrown. Weeds choked the rose bushes. The fountain in the center of the circular drive was dry, filled with dead leaves and trash. The house loomed over me, dark and uninviting. I killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with the ghosts of 1,000 bad memories. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I could feel the physical reaction starting the tightness in my chest. The cold sweat at the base of my neck. This house had been my prison. It was the place where I learned that love was conditional and that I did not meet the conditions. But I forced my fingers to uncurl. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of the ocean and the damp rot of the house. I was not the scared little girl anymore. I was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and I had come to burn the pasture down. I opened the truck door and stepped onto the gravel. "I'm home," I whispered to the empty air, the words tasting like ash. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the front door, ready to play the part of a lifetime. The moment the heavy oak door creaked open, the smell hit me. It was not the scent of nostalgia. It was the scent of stagnation. It smelled of wet wool, dust that had settled for decades, and the faint, sickly sweet odor of rising damp that no amount of expensive potpourri could mask. I stepped into the foyer, my boots leaving a faint trail of mud on the marble floor. The house felt smaller than I remembered, or perhaps I had just grown too large for the box they had tried to keep me in. Beatrice was standing at the foot of the grand staircase. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere cardigan that I recognized from a collection 10 years ago, paired with stiff trousers that she probably thought made her look efficient. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, sprayed into a helmet of blonde defiance against her age. She watched me enter with the same expression one might use when discovering a cockroach in a salad. "You made it," she said, her voice echoing in the cavernous, empty hall. She did not move to hug me. She did not even extend a hand. Her eyes traveled down my body, lingering on the gray t-shirt and the paint-splattered jeans. I saw her upper lip curl, a reflex she could not control. "Good Lord, Imogen, did you drive here or did you hitchhike? You look like you have been sleeping in a construction site." "It is work clothes, Mother," I said, keeping my voice low and submissive. "I came straight from a job." "A job," she scoffed. "If you can call messy manual labor a job, I suppose I should be grateful you are working at all. Though looking at you, it is clear that whatever you are doing is not exactly lucrative." Before I could answer, a door slammed somewhere upstairs, and the click-clack of heels on hardwood announced the arrival of the golden child. Serafina descended the stairs, one hand trailing dramatically along the banister. She was wearing a silk dress that was inappropriate for a Tuesday afternoon at home, and her neck was draped in a heavy diamond necklace. I looked at the diamonds, from 10 feet away. They sparkled with aggressive brilliance, but I knew better. I had spent years studying light refraction and gemology. Real diamonds have a depth, a fire that comes from within. These stones were too white, too flat. They were high-end crystal, or perhaps laboratory-grown simulants set in plated silver. Serafina was wearing $5,000 worth of costume jewelry and pretending it was $100,000 worth of heirlooms. "Oh, you are here," Serafina said. Reaching the bottom step, she gave a theatrical sigh, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "Thank God. Maman and I are absolutely exhausted. You have no idea how stressful this market is. Imogen, the realtors are sharks. They are trying to tell us that the roof needs repairs and the foundation is shifting. It is all just a ploy to lower the listing price because the economy is so sluggish." She was lying. The economy was booming for luxury real estate. The problem was not the market. The problem was that Blackwood Manor was a rotting corpse of a house that they had neglected for 20 years because they had spent the maintenance budget on vacations to Saint-Tropez. "I am here to help," I said, dropping my duffel bag on the floor. "Well, do not just stand there," Beatrice said, clapping her hands once. "We are not paying you by the hour. In fact, we are not paying you at all. Consider this repayment for the 18 years of food and shelter we provided." The words were a sharp jab, intended to draw blood. Once, I would have flinched, but as I looked at them, Beatrice with her fading cashmere and Serafina with her fake diamonds, I felt a sudden, violent pull of memory. The hallway dissolved, and I was 8 years old again. I was standing in this exact spot. clutching a mop that was twice my height. My hands were red and raw from the harsh soap water. Through the open doors of the living room, I could see Serafina. She was 13, wearing a pink tutu and satin point shoes. A private ballet instructor was correcting her posture, speaking in hushed, reverent tones. Beatrice was sitting on the sofa, watching Serafina with a look of rapture, as if she were witnessing the second coming of Christ. "Point your toes, darling like a swan," Beatrice had called out. I had dropped the mop. The handle clattered against the bucket. Beatrice's head snapped toward me, the look of rapture instantly replaced by a mask of annoyance. "Imogen, honestly," she had hissed, "can you not be clumsy for 5 minutes? Serafina is trying to concentrate. You are disrupting her artistic process. Go finish cleaning the back scullery. You are such a gloomy child. Always lurking, always making noise." Gloomy, that was the word she assigned to me. Serafina was radiant. Serafina was special. Imogen was gloomy. Imogen was the background noise that needed to be silenced. But there was one person who never found me gloomy. My mind drifted further back, to the smell of old paper and lavender. Grandma Josephine, Grandma Jo. She was the matriarch of the family, the one whose money Beatrice was currently burning through. She was a woman of sharp intellect and few words, who spent her days in the library reading history and philosophy, while Beatrice was busy grooming Serafina to be a trophy wife. Grandma Jo would call me into the library. "Come here, little shadow," she would say, patting the leather ottoman beside her chair. "Tell me what you observe." She taught me to look at the world, not just see it. She taught me to notice the details, the way a person's hands moved when they lied, the difference between a veneer and solid wood. She was the only one who ever looked at me and saw a person, not a servant. But then the sickness came. When I was 16, Grandma Jo fell ill. It was a slow, wasting disease that confined her to the master bedroom on the second floor. That was when the isolation began. Beatrice, sensing that the inheritance was near, took total control. She fired the nurses Grandma liked and hired new ones who reported only to her. She barred me from the room. "Grandma is too weak," Beatrice told me, blocking the bedroom door with her body. "She does not want to see you. Imogen, you upset her. You are too depressing. Serafina is in there reading her poetry. That is what she needs. Light and joy, not you." I knew she was lying. I knew Grandma Jo would never turn me away. But I was powerless. I was the invisible daughter. Until that one night. It was 3 weeks before she died. A storm was battering the coast, the wind howling against the gables like a banshee. Beatrice had gone to a dinner party, leaving Serafina in charge, which meant Serafina was in her room talking on the phone to a boy. The house was dark. I crept down the hallway, avoiding the third floorboard that always creaked. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pushed open the heavy door to Grandma's room. The air inside was thick with the smell of medicine and sickness. She was awake. Her silver hair was spread out on the pillow like a halo of cobwebs. She looked so small, so fragile, buried under the heavy quilts. But when she saw me, her eyes snapped open. They were bright, lucid, burning with a final, desperate energy. "Imogen," she whispered. Her voice was like dry leaves skittering on pavement. I rushed to the bed and fell to my knees. Grabbing her hand, it was cold and bony. "I'm here, Grandma. I'm sorry. Mom wouldn't let me come." "I know," she rasped. "She is a vulture. Imogen, she is waiting for the carcass." She struggled to sit up, her breath hitching. With a trembling hand, she reached under her pillow. She pulled out something small and pressed it into my palm. I opened my hand. It was a key. It was not a normal door key. It was small, made of tarnished brass, with an intricate head shaped like a blooming rose. It looked old, heavy for its size. "Listen to me," she hissed, her grip on my hand surprisingly strong. "This does not belong to the house. It belongs to the wall. Do not let your mother find it. Do not let Serafina see it. It is yours, only yours." "What is it for?" I whispered. tears streaming down my face. "It is for the day you are ready," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "They think I am senile. They think I do not know what they have done to my accounts. But I have left them a judgment. Imogen, and you are the executioner." She fell back against the pillows, exhausted. "Hide it. Go, before she comes back." "Well, stop thinking and start moving. You can start in the library. It is filled with those dusty old books she insisted on hoarding. I want it cleared, all of it. We need to stage the room as a home office for the potential buyers. Box up the books and move them to the garage. We will call a dumpster service later." "You want me to throw away her books?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "They are trash. Imogen," Serafina chimed in, checking her nails. "Old, smelly paper. Nobody reads anymore. Just get rid of them so the house doesn't smell like a mausoleum." "Fine," I said. "I will start now." I picked up my bag and turned toward the library. My heart began to beat a different rhythm now. It was not the frantic beat of the scared 8-year-old girl. It was the steady, heavy thud of a judge bringing down a gavel. They wanted me to clear out the trash. They had no idea that I was the expert in trash. I knew exactly how to sift through the debris to find the gold. And I knew that somewhere in that library, among the books they despised, was the lock that matched the brass key burning against my skin. I walked away from them, leaving Beatrice and Serafina standing in the foyer, planning how to spend money they did not have. I was not going to the library to clean. I was going to the library to hunt. The library was a tomb of neglected knowledge. The air was thick with the distinct, acrid scent of decaying paper and binding glue, a smell that usually brought me comfort in my studio, but here only smelled like abandonment. I pulled on a pair of white cotton gloves from my back pocket, a habit I could not break even when pretending to be a laborer. I approached the mahogany shelves that lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Beatrice had called this collection trash, but as I ran my fingers along the spines, I saw the jagged gaps where books had been pulled out haphazardly. My professional eye cataloged the missing volumes instantly. A first edition of Bleak House was gone. A signed collection of Yeats that used to sit on the second shelf was missing. I knelt to examine the remaining books on the bottom shelf and found a receipt tucked inside a copy of Little Women. It was from a local pawn shop, dated 3 months ago, $50. Beatrice had sold a leather-bound, gold-leafed edition of Great Expectations, printed in 1861 for $50. My stomach churned. In the right auction house, restored properly, that book alone would have fetched $4,000. She was not just selling our heritage, she was giving it away to strangers for the price of a cheap lunch because she was too arrogant to ask for a valuation. It was a desecration. The sheer waste of it made my hands tremble. I stood up, gripping the edge of the ladder, and suddenly the dusty library dissolved. The smell of old paper was replaced by the scent of wet earth and expensive lilies. I was back in the cemetery. 5 years ago, it was raining, a cliché that felt orchestrated by Beatrice herself. The sky was a bruised charcoal, weeping a freezing drizzle that soaked through my cheap black coat. We stood around the open grave, a small crowd of Newport's elite huddled under oversized black umbrellas. Beatrice stood at the precipice of the hole, draped in black lace like a grieving widow from a Gothic novel. She was sobbing, loud, ragged gasps that shook her shoulders. I watched her, dry-eyed and numb. I knew that 2 hours earlier, she had spent 45 minutes choosing waterproof mascara to ensure her tears would look cinematic but not messy. A local news photographer was crouching behind a tombstone, his lens trained on her. Every time the shutter clicked, her wails increased in volume. Serafina stood beside her, wearing a hat with a veil that was fashionable rather than mournful, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. They were performing. They were the stars of a tragedy titled The Death of the Matriarch, and I was just an extra in the background, shivering in the cold. I looked down at the coffin. Grandma Jo was in there, my only ally, my only tether to sanity in this house of mirrors. And I could not cry. I was too busy holding myself together, terrified that if I let a single crack appear, I would shatter completely. later that afternoon. The performance moved to the lawyer's office. Mr. Sterling was a man who looked like he had been carved out of cold butter. He was soft, pale, and greasy. He had been Beatrice's personal attorney for years, a man who specialized in making problems disappear for the wealthy. We sat in his office, surrounded by framed degrees that looked more like decorations than credentials. Beatrice and Serafina sat in the leather wingback chairs. I sat on a folding metal chair near the door, as if I were there to take the minutes rather than hear my fate. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Josephine Blackwood was a woman of strong opinions, he began, his voice oily. But in her final months, she realized the importance of family unity and stability. I have here her last will and testament, drafted and signed 6 months ago. He began to read. The legal jargon washed over me, words like assets, liquidate, and beneficiary bouncing off the walls. But the meaning was clear enough. The house, the investments, the jewelry, the antique collection. To my devoted daughter, Beatrice Blackwood, who cared for me in my final days, I leave the entirety of my estate. Mr. Sterling read, looking up to smile obsequiously at my mother. Beatrice let out a breath she had been holding, a sound of pure, unadulterated greed disguised as relief. She reached out and squeezed Serafina's hand. Serafina smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. And, Mr. Sterling continued, it is my wish that Beatrice manages these funds to ensure the continued prosperity of the Blackwood name, specifically regarding the future of my granddaughter, Serafina, whose potential shines so brightly. Silence. I waited. I waited for my name. I waited for the footnote. To Imogen. I leave my books. To Imogen. I leave a kind word. Mr. Sterling closed the folder. That concludes the reading. The silence in the room stretched, thin and tight as a wire. I felt the blood drain from my face. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of wood. Wait, I said. My voice sounded small, pathetic. That's it. She didn't mention me. Beatrice turned in her chair. The mask of the grieving daughter was gone. In its place was a look of cold, bored pity. She sighed, as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. Oh, Imogen, she said, we didn't want to embarrass you in front of Mr. Sterling, but since you asked, yes, she left you nothing. Why? I whispered. I was the one who read to her. I was the one who sat with her until you banned me from the room. That is exactly why, Beatrice said. Standing up and smoothing her skirt, she walked over to me, looming in that way she did when she wanted to make me feel small. Mother and I had long talks before she passed. She was disappointed in you. Imogen, deeply disappointed. That's a lie, I said, my voice shaking. Is it? Beatrice raised an eyebrow. She told me she was worried about your lack of ambition, your lack of spark. She said you were too dependent, always hiding in the shadows. She felt that leaving you money would only cripple you further. She wanted to teach you a lesson in independence. She wanted you to learn to stand on your own 2 feet, without the crutch of the Blackwood fortune. She called you a leech, actually, Serafina chimed in from the chair, examining her cuticles. Well, not in so many words, but she implied it. She said she didn't want to fund a life of mediocrity. The words hit me like physical blows. Disappointed, leech, mediocrity. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They were taking the one person who had loved me and twisting her memory into a weapon to sever me from my inheritance. But do not worry, Serafina added, looking up with a smirk. We are not heartless. I am going to need a personal assistant now that I will be traveling more. You can handle my schedule, do my laundry, maybe run my social media. I cannot pay you, of course, since room and board here is so expensive, but I will let you live in the servants' quarters above the garage. It will be good experience for you. I looked at them. I looked at Beatrice, smug and victorious. I looked at Serafina, cruel and vacuous. And I looked at Mr. Sterling, who was busy shuffling papers, pretending he wasn't witnessing the emotional slaughter of a 23-year-old girl. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet sound of a tether breaking. "No," I said. "Excuse me?" Beatrice blinked. "No," I repeated, louder this time. "I will not be your servant, and I do not believe you." "Believe what you want," Beatrice said, turning her back on me. "The will is legal, Mr. Sterling drew it up himself. You have nothing. Imogen, you are nothing. Now, if you are quite done making a scene, we have celebration dinner reservations." I walked out of that office into the rain. I did not go back to the house to pack my clothes. I went to the bank, withdrew the $200 I had saved from birthday money over the years, and bought a bus ticket to New York City. I left with the clothes on my back and the brass key burning a hole against my chest. I swore then. As the bus pulled away from the curb, watching the lights of Newport fade into the darkness, that I would never return until I could buy and sell all of them. The memory released me, and I gasped, sucking in the stale air of the library. My hands were gripping a dusty leather chair so hard my knuckles were white. The rage was still there. A cold, hard knot in my stomach, but it was tempered now by focus. I was not that girl anymore. I was not helpless. I turned back to the task at hand. Beatrice wanted the room cleared. I grabbed a heavy black trash bag from the roll she had thrown at me and began pulling books off the lower shelves. These were the less valuable ones, encyclopedias from the 1980s, old gardening almanacs. I reached for a stack of papers jammed into the corner of the bottom shelf. Behind a row of oversized atlases, it looked like a pile of old notebooks. I pulled them out. They were cheap composition notebooks, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $1. The covers were black and white marble cardboard, fraying at the edges. I almost tossed them into the bag, assuming they were old school assignments. But something stopped me. A date written on the spine of the top one in white correction fluid. 2020. That was the year Grandma died. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat down on the floor, ignoring the dust, and opened the first notebook. The handwriting was shaky, the script of a hand battling tremors and weakness, but it was unmistakably hers. It was Grandma Joe's. I flipped through the pages. It wasn't a diary of feelings. It was a log, a ledger. January 12th. The entry read, "Beatrice came in today, asked for the checkbook again, said the roof needed repairs. I know the roof was fixed in 2018. She is lying. I saw the new bracelet she was wearing. Cartier, $5,000 at least." I turned the page, my breath catching in my throat. February 4th. The nurse, Mrs. Higgins, was fired today. Beatrice said she was stealing. Mrs. Higgins was a good woman. Beatrice fired her because she wouldn't sign the witness papers for the new document Mr. Sterling brought over. I refused to sign it too. They shouted at me. Beatrice told me I was confused. I'm not confused. I'm tired. I read on, my eyes devouring the words. The entries painted a horrifying picture of her final months. It wasn't just neglect. It was systematic isolation and financial abuse. Grandma knew. She knew exactly what Beatrice was doing. She knew about the fake will. March 20th. The final entry read, the writing was barely legible, trailing off the lines. She thinks she has won. She thinks because I am in this bed, I am powerless. But I have hidden the real legacy, not in the bank, not where Sterling can find it. The wall, the fire, Imogen will find it. My little shadow sees everything. She will come back, and when she does, she will burn their house of lies to the ground. I stared at the words. Imogen will find it. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. This was not the time for grief. This was vindication. Beatrice had looked me in the eye and told me Grandma was disappointed in me. She had crushed my self-worth with a lie so heinous it had taken me years of therapy to unpack. But here was the truth, written in shaky blue ink. Grandma hadn't left me nothing. She had left me everything. She had left me the mission. I looked at the trash bag in my hand. Beatrice expected me to throw this junk away. She expected me to blindly destroy the evidence of her own crimes. I stood up and walked over to my duffel bag in the corner of the room. I carefully wrapped the notebooks in my spare sweater and tucked them deep inside. Then, I returned to the shelf and began filling the trash bag with actual trash old magazines. Broken binders, newspapers. I made plenty of noise, ripping paper and tossing books, ensuring that if anyone was listening, it sounded like I was doing exactly what I was told. "You wanted me to clean up." "Mother," I whispered to the empty room, a cold smile touching my lips. "I am cleaning up. I am just starting with the evidence." I tied the trash bag shut and hefted it over my shoulder. As I walked out of the library, I felt the weight of the key against my chest. It felt lighter now. It wasn't just a promise anymore. It was a key to a reckoning. The stage was set, the players were in position, and now I had the script. The dust in the library was not just particulate matter. It was a physical manifestation of neglect, a layer of gray snow covering the graveyard of my grandmother's intellect. As I wiped down a shelf of water-damaged encyclopedias, my mind drifted away from the gloom of Blackwood Manor and back to the cramped, chemical-scented backroom of a dusty antique shop in Brooklyn where my real life began. 5 years ago, after I fled this house with nothing but a backpack and a burning coal of resentment in my chest, I did not immediately become the polished professional I am today. I started as a ghost. I found work sweeping floors at a restoration shop run by an elderly man who had more knowledge in his little finger than my entire family had in their collective brains. He saw how I handled the objects. He saw that I did not just touch them. I listened to them. I spent my days scrubbing grime off Victorian chair legs and my nights studying chemistry and mechanics. I learned that every object tells a story if you know how to read the scars. I learned to spot a forgery by the oxidation of the paint or the incorrect weave of a canvas. But more importantly, I learned about secrets. I learned about hidden compartments in Georgian desks, false bottoms in jewelry boxes, and the intricate, terrifyingly beautiful mechanisms of antique safes. I became obsessed with locks. I bought old mechanisms off the internet and spent hours disassembling them, learning the feel of a tumbler falling into place, the subtle vibration of a bolt retracting. I learned that cracking a safe is not about force, it is about empathy. You have to feel what the maker felt. You have to understand the mind that wanted to hide something. By the time I was 26, I had outgrown the shop. I founded Ethelgard Restorations. The name was obscure, ancient, and sounded expensive, which was exactly the point. I positioned myself not just as a restorer, but as a vault. My clients were not museums that required public disclosures. My clients were hedge fund managers, reclusive heiresses, and tech moguls who wanted their Rembrandts cleaned and their 18th century diaries preserved without a single soul knowing they owned them. I became the ghost. I never met clients in person. Everything was handled through encrypted emails and intermediaries. They shipped the items to my secure facility, and I returned them in pristine condition. My anonymity was my brand. It allowed me to charge 3 times the market rate because they were paying for my silence as much as my skill. While I was building an empire in the shadows, Beatrice and Serafina were busy dismantling one in the spotlight. As I moved a stack of heavy legal tomes, I thought about the investigative report I had run on my own family before driving up here. It was a dossier of stupidity. Beatrice had treated the inheritance like an infinite spring. She had poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into exclusive investment opportunities that were nothing more than Ponzi schemes dressed up in Italian suits. She had funded Serafina's lifestyle brand, which consisted mostly of buying followers on social media and hosting launch parties for products that never existed. And then there was the vanity. I looked at a framed photo on the desk, taken recently. Beatrice's face was smooth, unnervingly so. It was the result of 5 facelifts and enough filler to sink a small boat. She was chasing her youth with the desperation of a drowning woman. And the surgeons were charging her a fortune for the privilege. The financial records were a bloodbath. Blackwood Manor had been mortgaged not once, but 3 times. They were drowning in interest payments. The bank had already issued a final notice. They had 1 week to sell the house or lose everything. That was why Beatrice was so frantic. That was why she needed the attic cleared. She was trying to slap a coat of paint on a sinking ship. "What are you doing?" "Sleeping." The screeching voice shattered my thoughts. Beatrice stood in the doorway of the library, tapping her foot impatiently. She was holding a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in a napkin. I was currently kneeling on the floor, carefully wiping down the frame of a painting I had found leaned against the wall behind a curtain. It was so covered in soot and grime that the image was barely visible, but I knew the texture of the canvas. It was mid-19th century, likely a Hudson River School original, beneath the filth. It was worth at least $80,000. To Beatrice, it was just a dirty square of fabric. "I am cleaning, Mother," I said, keeping my head down. "This frame is very delicate." "Delicate." She let out a harsh, barking laugh. "It is garbage. Imogen, just like everything else in this room. You have been in here for 3 hours and you have barely filled 5 bags. You are moving at a glacial pace. God, you are useless. I do not know why I thought you could handle a simple task like manual labor." She walked over to where I was kneeling. I could smell the expensive perfume she wore, a cloying scent that tried to mask the smell of gin on her breath. "I am being thorough," I said, my voice tight. "Thorough," she mocked. "You are lazy. You always were. A dreamer. A waste of space." She looked down at the sandwich in her hand. It was a turkey club on stale white bread, the lettuce wilting and brown at the edges. It looked like something she had fished out of the back of the fridge. "Here," she said, tossing it at me. The sandwich hit my shoulder and slid onto the floor, the napkin unfolding to reveal the dry crust. "Eat something," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You look like a skeleton. And hurry up. If this room is not done by tonight, you can sleep in the shed." She turned on her heel and marched out, leaving me kneeling on the Persian rug next to the fallen sandwich. I stared at the food. The old Imogen would have cried. The old Imogen would have felt the sting of humiliation burn her cheeks. But I just felt a cold, clinical detachment. She treated me like a stray dog she regretted feeding. She had no idea she was kicking a wolf. I picked up the sandwich with 2 fingers and dropped it into the trash bag. Then, I turned back to the bookshelf I'd been examining before she interrupted. I wasn't moving slowly because I was lazy. I was moving slowly because I was hunting. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, sleek device that looked like a pen. It was a high-intensity UV flashlight, a tool of my trade. I clicked it on, casting a purple glow over the spines of the books on the 3rd shelf. Grandma Jo had been a historian, but she was also a woman who loved puzzles. She had taught me about invisible ink when I was 7, using lemon juice and a candle, but as she got older, she upgraded her methods. I scanned the light over the collection of Victorian poetry. Nothing. I moved to the history section. Nothing. Then, I reached the bottom shelf, where a set of unassuming gardening journals sat. They looked boring, the kind of books Beatrice would never touch in a million years. I ran the UV light over the spine of a book titled Flora of New England. There. Glowing in a faint, ghostly blue against the dark green fabric of the binding were numbers: 4, 18, 32. My heart skipped a beat. I checked the next volume. Left, right, left. It was the combination. I quickly clicked off the light and shoved the flashlight back into my pocket. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the discovery. Grandma hadn't just left a key. She had left a map, hidden in plain sight, written in a medium that only I, the granddaughter she trained to see the unseen, would ever think to look for. Beatrice thought I was scrubbing dirt off trash. She thought she was punishing me by making me crawl on the floor. She didn't realize that down here, on my knees, I was the one holding all the power. I stood up, brushing the dust from my jeans. I looked at the painting I had been cleaning. I decided to leave it. Let Beatrice sell it for $10 at a yard sale. Let her throw away a fortune because she was too ignorant to see it. It was poetic justice. But the safe was different. I grabbed another trash bag and began aggressively throwing old newspapers into it, making as much noise as possible. "I'm working, Mother," I shouted toward the open door, my voice cracking with a perfect imitation of desperation. "I'm hurrying." Inside, I was laughing. The combination was burned into my memory. 4, 18, 32. It was my birthday. April 18th. She had used my birthday. A lump formed in my throat, hard and painful. Even in her final days, when her mind was supposedly failing, she had anchored her secret to the day I was born. It was a final message of love, whispered across the years. "You are the key. Imogen, you were always the key." I wiped my eyes with the back of my dusty glove. I would not cry for them. I would not let Beatrice see a single tear. I would save my emotion for the moment the vault door swung open. Until then, I would play the part. I would be the slow, stupid, hungry dog, and I would wait for the moment to bite. The numbers 4, 18, 32 were now a drumbeat in my head, a rhythm I moved to as I navigated the decaying labyrinth of Blackwood Manor. They were not just a date, they were a sequence, a combination. But a combination is useless without the lock it belongs to. I spent the next 2 days playing the role of the diligent, invisible servant. I hauled boxes, I scrubbed baseboards, and I listened. In a house like this, sound travels through the ventilation shafts and the hollow spaces between walls. If you know where to stand, you can hear a whisper from 3 rooms away. I was in the hallway outside the dining room, polishing a sconce that was missing half its crystals. When I heard Beatrice's voice booming, she was on the phone, likely with one of her few remaining friends who hadn't yet realized she was destitute. "Oh, darling, please," she laughed, the sound brittle and fake. Of course I checked. I tore this place apart after the old bat died. I had contractors in here with sledgehammers. We checked the floorboards, the attic, the basement. There is nothing, just stacks of useless diaries and moldy letters. Josephine was senile. She probably buried her money in the garden and forgot where, or maybe she spent it all on those ridiculous charities she loved so much. I paused, my polishing cloth hovering over the brass. She had used sledgehammers. That explained the strange patches of mismatched plaster in the hallway. Beatrice had hunted for the fortune with brute force, destroying the architecture in her greed. But Grandma Jo was smarter than a sledgehammer. She understood that the best hiding place is not the one you build, but the one you integrate. Later that afternoon, the front door banged open. Serafina breezed in, bringing with her a gust of cold air and the overpowering scent of men's cologne. "Mama, look who I brought," she squealed. I was on my knees in the foyer, scraping dried mud off the tile grout with a toothbrush, a task Beatrice had assigned me specifically to humiliate me. I looked up to see a man standing beside Serafina. He was tall, handsome in a generic, catalog model sort of way, wearing a suit that was too shiny and a watch that was too big. His name was Marcus. I knew his type instantly. I had seen dozens of men like him in the art world's slick, charming predators who preyed on wealthy women with low self-esteem. He had "con artist" written all over his veneered smile. "This must be the famous sister," Marcus said, looking down at me with an amused smirk. He didn't offer a hand. He treated me like a piece of furniture that had been placed inconveniently in his path. "Oh, that's just Imogen," Serafina said, waving a hand dismissively. "She is helping us clear out the junk. Imogen, this is Marcus. He is a visionary developer from Miami. He is going to help us with the sale." "Charmed," Marcus said, stepping over my legs. "You missed a spot there." "Sweetie," I gripped the toothbrush until the plastic handle bent. "Nice to meet you," I muttered. Keeping my eyes on the floor, they walked past me into the living room. I waited 10 seconds, then stood up and silently moved to the ventilation grate near the kitchen door. "This place has potential, babe," I heard Marcus say. "Serious potential. I'm thinking we gut the interior completely, tear down these depressing walls. Open concept. We can market it as a boutique wellness resort. The Blackwood Retreat, infinity pool in the back, maybe a helipad on the south lawn. The Chinese investors I know will eat this up. A resort, Beatrice cooed. Oh, Marcus, you are a genius. And the money, how much do you think we can get? If we position it right, 10 million. Easy, Marcus lied. I knew the property value. In its current state, with the structural damage and the liens, they would be lucky to get 2 million. He was inflating their ego to get access to whatever cash they had left. But we need to move fast, Marcus added, his voice dropping. My contacts say the market is about to dip, and I know you have that situation with the bank. We need to list by Monday, Tuesday at the latest. I know. Beatrice sounded frantic. The bank has been calling every hour. They gave us until next Friday before they start foreclosure proceedings. We just need to clear out the trash so the photographers can come in. Next Friday? I had a deadline. 7 days. But I wouldn't need 7 days. That night? The house fell silent. Beatrice had passed out after half a bottle of gin. Serafina and Marcus had gone out to a club in Providence, probably charging the bill to a credit card that was already maxed out. It was time. I went to my duffel bag and pulled out the black case I had smuggled in under my pile of clothes. Inside lay my tools. Not a hammer, not a crowbar. I took out a thermal imaging camera, a high-frequency density scanner, and a stethoscope. I moved through the dark hallways like a shadow. I knew Beatrice had checked the obvious places, the floorboards, the attic, but she hadn't checked the heart of the house. Grandma Jo had spent the last 5 years of her life in the master bedroom on the second floor. It was a room Beatrice refused to enter now because she said it smelled of death. It was perfect. I entered the room. It was cold. The furniture draped in white sheets that looked like ghosts in the moonlight. I walked straight to the fireplace. It was a massive structure of carved marble. Dominating the west wall, I turned on the thermal camera. The screen glowed with a spectrum of blues and oranges. I scanned the walls. The plaster was uniform blue cold. I scanned the floor. Cold. Then I aimed the camera at the chimney breast, the stone column rising above the mantelpiece. There, in the center of the stone, behind the heavy portrait of my great-grandfather, was a square patch of slightly different temperature. It was warmer, not by much, maybe half a degree, but to a scanner, it was a beacon. It meant there was a void behind the stone, an air pocket that insulated it differently from the solid masonry. I set the camera down and picked up the density scanner. I ran it over the stone. Beep, beep, beep. The density dropped significantly in a 2-foot square section. It was a hollow space. My heart began to race. I pulled the heavy portrait away from the wall and set it on the floor. The stone behind it was smooth. Seamless marble. To the naked eye, it was solid. Beatrice could have stared at this for 100 years and seen nothing. But I wasn't looking with my eyes. I was looking with my memory. 4, 18, 32. I looked at the marble mantelpiece. It was decorated with intricate carvings of vines and flowers. In the center was a large, decorative rosette. I ran my fingers over the petals. There were dozens of them. I counted. Starting from the top center petal, I counted 4 to the left. I pressed it. Nothing happened. I frowned. Maybe it wasn't a button. Maybe it was a dial. I placed my palm flat against the rosette. I tried to turn it. It moved. It was stiff with age, gritty with dust, but it rotated. I turned it left to the 4 o'clock position. Click, a tiny sound, barely audible. I turned it right, past the center, all the way to the 18 position, which would be the 6 o'clock mark if the dial was a 24-hour clock. But that didn't make sense. I stopped. I closed my eyes. Grandma Jo wasn't a mechanic. She was a historian. She loved symbols. 4, April, the 4th month, 18, the day, 32, the year she was born, 1932. The safe wasn't digital. It was mechanical. And the dial wasn't just the rosette. It was the entire mantle. I looked at the carved vines. There were leaves. I pressed the 4th leaf on the left vine. It sank into the stone a fraction of an inch. Clunk. I moved to the right vine. I counted 18 leaves down. I pressed. Clunk. 32. There were no 32 leaves. I stepped back. Frustration rising. Think. Imogen. Think like her. 32. The year. I looked at the fireplace grate. It was iron. It had a pattern of bars. I counted them. 32 bars. I grabbed the 32nd bar on the far right. It was loose. I pulled it. A heavy, grinding sound echoed in the silent room. It sounded like the earth itself was groaning. The seamless marble panel above the fireplace didn't swing open. It slid. It slid downwards, disappearing into the mantelpiece with a smooth, oiled motion that spoke of incredible engineering. Revealed in the dark void was the face of a safe. It was magnificent, a vintage Titan, polished steel, with a brass combination dial that gleamed in the moonlight. It was a beast of a machine, impenetrable to brute force. You couldn't drill it. You couldn't blow it up without destroying the contents. I stepped forward, my breath catching in my throat. I reached out and touched the cold steel. This was it, the end game. I had the key around my neck, the brass key. I saw the keyhole. It was small, located right in the center of the dial. I pulled the chain from my shirt, my hands trembling slightly as I unclasped it. I inserted the key. It slid in like it was coming home. I could open it now. I could turn the key, spin the dial, and take whatever was inside. I could take the money and disappear into the night, leaving them with their rotting house and their debts. But that wasn't the plan. Revenge isn't about taking what is yours. It is about making them watch you take it. It is about the look on Beatrice's face when she realizes she was standing on a gold mine while begging for pennies. It is about Serafina realizing her resort is a fantasy. I needed an audience. I gripped the key, but instead of turning it, I pulled it out. I pressed the hidden lever behind the 32nd bar again. The marble panel slid back up, sealing the secret away. The painting went back on the hook. I stepped back. The room looked exactly as it had 5 minutes ago. Cold, empty, dead. But now I knew. The bomb was primed. I just needed to invite everyone to the explosion. I packed my tools back into the case. As I walked back to my small, damp room above the garage, a smile spread across my face. Tomorrow. I would tell Beatrice I had found something odd behind the fireplace. I would play the confused, incompetent daughter one last time. I would let her call the lawyers. I would let her call Marcus. I would let them gather like vultures around a carcass, salivating at the thought of a feast. And then I would starve them. The morning sun that filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of the master bedroom was not warm. It was a cold, revealing light that exposed every dust mote dancing in the stagnant air. I had returned to the room at dawn, hours before the rest of the house would stir, to verify what I had found in the dark. My initial discovery had been fueled by adrenaline and shadows, but now, with the clinical gaze of a professional restorer, I needed to understand the machine I was dealing with. I stood before the fireplace again. Now that I knew what to look for, the genius of the design was staggering. The house was not merely a Victorian pile of bricks. It was a puzzle box commissioned by my great-grandfather and executed by Silas Vane. Vane was a reclusive architect from the late 19th century, a man whose name was whispered in restoration circles with a mix of reverence and frustration. He was famous for designing panic rooms and hidden vaults for the paranoid industrialists of the Gilded Age. His mechanisms were not just functional, they were silent, counterweighted masterpieces that used the gravity of the building itself to operate. I ran my gloved hand over the marble mantelpiece. The seam I had missed for years was invisible to the naked eye, hidden within the natural veining of the stone. It was a friction-fit joint, cut with a precision that modern laser tools would struggle to replicate. I took the brass key from around my neck. In the daylight, the tarnish on the metal seemed to glow with a dull. Knowing warmth, I needed to be sure, if this mechanism jammed while Beatrice was watching, the entire performance would fail. I inserted the key into the center of the rosette. I felt the pins inside the lock cylinder, 5 of them, likely hand-turned brass align with a tactile satisfaction that sent a shiver up my arm. I turned it. There was no grinding, only the heavy, muffled thunk of a deadbolt retracting deep within the masonry. I pulled the 32nd iron bar of the grate. The wall did not just slide, it glided, A massive section of the marble chimney breast, weighing perhaps 300 pounds, sank noiselessly into the floor. And there it was, the Titan. In the daylight, the safe was terrifying. It was a Titan Imperial, manufactured around 1925. I recognized the model immediately from the distinct rivet pattern on the outer casing and the dual-dial configuration. It stood 5 feet tall, a monolith of black manganese steel designed to shatter drill bits and resist nitroglycerin. This was not a residential safe. This was a bank vault that had been domesticated. I stepped closer, examining the hinges. They were sealed, impossible to cut. The dial was protected by a tempered glass relocker plate. If someone tried to punch the lock or drill the spindle, the glass would shatter, releasing spring-loaded bolts that would permanently seize the door shut. It was a fortress. Beatrice and her sledgehammer-wielding contractors could have beaten on this wall for 100 years and never scratched the paint. I reached out and spun the dial. It moved with the smoothness of silk over glass. Left 4, right 18, left 32. The sequence was etched into my mind. But I did not execute the final turn. I could not open it yet. The climactic act required an audience. I reversed the process. Pulling the lever to raise the marble wall back into place, it clicked shut. The illusion of the solid fireplace restored perfectly. I wiped the mantelpiece with my sleeve to remove any fingerprints, then stepped back. The trap was primed. Now I just needed the rat. I waited until 10 o'clock. I could hear Beatrice moving around in the kitchen, complaining loudly to Serafina about the lack of decent coffee. I mussed my hair, rubbed a little soot from the fireplace onto my cheek to look properly grimy, and ran downstairs. "Mother," I said, bursting into the kitchen with feigned breathlessness. Beatrice was sitting at the island, nursing a migraine and a cup of watery instant coffee. Serafina was scrolling through her phone, ignoring the world. "What is it now?" Beatrice snapped, not looking up. "Did you break something? If you broke something, you are paying for it?" "No," I said, panting slightly. "I was cleaning the soot from the master bedroom fireplace. The one you said was sealed up. I think there is something wrong with the structure. The metal grate is loose, and when I pulled on it to clean behind the bars, the wall moved." Beatrice froze. Her coffee cup hovered halfway to her mouth. She turned her head slowly, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" "The wall moved." "I mean it shifted," I said, widening my eyes to look like a confused simpleton. "There is a space behind it, a big one." The cup crashed onto the saucer. Beatrice was off her stool in a second, moving with a speed I hadn't seen in years. "Show me." We marched up the stairs. A bizarre parade of greed. Beatrice led the way. Serafina trailed behind, looking annoyed at having to climb steps, and I followed, the humble servant. When we reached the bedroom, Beatrice rushed to the fireplace. "Where?" she demanded. "Show me exactly what you did." "I was just cleaning this bar," I said, pointing to the grate. "This one here." Beatrice grabbed the iron bar. She didn't pull it. She yanked it with the desperation of a starving animal. The mechanism engaged. The heavy marble slab slid downward with its signature silent grace. The black steel face of the Titan Imperial was revealed, imposing and dark against the pale stone. Beatrice gasped. It was a sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," Serafina whispered, dropping her phone on the rug. Is that a safe?" "It is a vault," Beatrice corrected, her voice trembling with hysteria. She stepped forward, reaching out to touch the cold metal as if it were a religious icon. "I knew it. I knew that old witch was hiding it. She told everyone she was broke. But look at this. You don't buy a safe like this to hide diary entries. This is for gold, bullion, bonds." Her eyes were wild, darting over the steel surface. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, she smiled at me. It was a terrifying, predatory smile. "You found it, Imogen. You actually found it." I just wanted to clean," I stammered. shrinking back. "Marcus!" Serafina screamed, running into the hallway. "Marcus, get up here, now!" Minutes later, Marcus came skidding into the room, buttoning his shirt. When he saw the safe, he let out a low whistle. "Hello, beautiful," he murmured. Walking up to the Titan, he tapped the steel with his knuckle. "That is serious hardware. Beatrice, we are talking old school, Depression-era tough. Whatever is in there, someone wanted it to stay there forever. Can you open it?" Beatrice asked, clutching his arm. "You know about these things, right? You are a developer." Marcus puffed out his chest, trying to look knowledgeable. He grabbed the handle and yanked. It didn't budge. He spun the dial randomly. "It is locked tight. We need a drill. A big one. I can go to the hardware store and get a diamond-tipped bit. We can drill right through the lock." "No!" I shouted. The word came out sharper than I intended. They all turned to look at me, surprised by my outburst. I quickly lowered my voice, wringing my hands. I read about these, in the library, when I was sorting the books. This is a Titan. If you drill it, there is a glass plate inside that breaks. If the glass breaks, the bolts lock permanently. You will never get it open. You would have to melt the whole thing down, and that would burn whatever is inside. Paper money, documents. They would all be ash. Beatrice paled. "Is that true?" she asked Marcus. Marcus hesitated. He clearly had no idea, but his ego wouldn't let him admit it. He shrugged. "It is possible. Some of these older models had booby traps. We shouldn't risk burning the cash." "Then what do we do?" Beatrice wailed, pacing the room. "It is right there. My inheritance is right there. I cannot just look at it." "We need a locksmith," Serafina said. "I will Google one." "Not just any locksmith," Marcus warned. "You call a local guy. Word gets out. People talk. If there is millions in gold in there, do you want the whole town knowing you want the IRS knocking on your door tomorrow?" Beatrice stopped pacing. "No, no police, no IRS. This has to be discreet." This was the moment. The window was open. I might know someone," I said softly. Beatrice turned to me. "Yes," I said, looking at my shoes. "When I was looking for work online, before I came here, I was on these forums, for antique collectors. There was this man, a specialist. He posts about restoring old bank vaults. He says he can open anything without damaging it. He's very private. He works for rich people who don't want questions asked." "Is he expensive?" Beatrice asked instinctively. "Probably," I said. "But he is the best, and he is discreet. I think I still have his email saved on my phone." Beatrice looked at the safe, then at Marcus, then at me. Greed was warring with paranoia in her eyes. Greed won. "Call him," she ordered. "Email him. Tell him I will pay him whatever he wants. Just get him here, today." "I will try," I said. "But he is very busy. He travels a lot." "Tell him it is an emergency," Beatrice shrieked. "Tell him it is a matter of life and death." I scurried out of the room, clutching my phone. As I turned the corner into the hallway, I heard Beatrice laughing, a manic, high-pitched sound. "We are saved, Serafina. I told you she didn't leave us nothing. We are going to be rich again." I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the faucet to mask the sound of my voice. I pulled up my encrypted messaging app and typed a message to the contact labeled AP. Subject, the Blackwood job. Client is hook, line, and sinker. The Titan is exposed. They are desperate. Fee is irrelevant to them. Be the shark they expect. Come at 6. I hit send. A P was Arthur Penhaligon. He wasn't just a colleague. He was my second in command at Ethelgard Restorations. He was a brilliant engineer and a better actor. We had played this game before with difficult clients, but never for stakes this personal. I looked at myself in the mirror. The soot on my face made me look like a chimney sweep, pathetic and dirty. But my eyes were bright. They were hard. Beatrice thought she was hiring a stranger to save her. She didn't know she was inviting the executioner's assistant to prepare the gallows. I turned off the water, dried my hands, and went back out to tell my mother that help was on the way. The atmosphere in Blackwood Manor had shifted from funereal gloom to a frantic, feverish anticipation. It was like watching a group of addicts waiting for their dealer to arrive. The date was set for 6 o'clock in the evening. Beatrice, ever the dramatist, had decided that the opening of the safe should be an event. She had not just invited Marcus and the family lawyer, Mr. Sterling. She had also summoned Mr. Henderson, the senior loan officer from the bank that held the 3 mortgages on the house. It was a bold, stupid move. She wanted Henderson there to see the money the moment it appeared, to prove to him that she was liquid again and to stop the foreclosure. She was gambling everything on the contents of a box she had never seen inside. The master bedroom had been transformed. Beatrice had ordered me to drag in extra chairs from the dining room and set up a makeshift bar on an antique vanity table. Bottles of vintage champagne, which I knew she had bought on her last functioning credit card, were chilling in a silver bucket. I stood in the corner, wearing my same stained jeans and oversized t-shirt, holding a tray of crystal flutes. To them, I was part of the furniture, a silent witness who was too dull to understand the magnitude of their triumph. "Another glass? Mr. Henderson," Beatrice cooed, pouring champagne with a hand that trembled slightly. She was wearing a black cocktail dress and every piece of jewelry she hadn't yet pawned. "I really appreciate your patience with the paperwork. You know how banks are, so rigid. But once we open this little time capsule, I am sure we can clear up that unpleasant balance immediately." Mr. Henderson, a man who looked like he had been born wearing a gray suit, took the glass but didn't smile. "We hope so, Mrs. Blackwood. The bank has been very lenient, but the deadline is absolute. If funds are not verified by close of business tomorrow, the property seizure process begins." "Oh, pish-posh," Beatrice waved a hand. "By tomorrow, we will be discussing investment strategies, not seizures. Marcus here tells me that safes of this era were often used to store bearer bonds. Do you know what 1920s bonds are worth today with interest millions?" Marcus was leaning against the mantelpiece, right next to the exposed Titan safe, posing like he had built it himself. "Absolutely," he said, swirling his drink. "I had a buddy in Palm Beach who found a safe like this in a teardown. 5 million in gold coins. Easy money." Serafina was sitting on the bed, which had been stripped of its sheets and covered with a silk throw. She was taking selfies with the safe in the background, carefully angling the camera so she looked rich and bored. She looked up and caught me staring. "Imogen, stop lurking," she snapped. "You are making people uncomfortable. Go fetch more ice. And for God's sake, try to stand up straight. You look like a hunchback." She turned to Marcus and giggled. "You know, after this is all sorted, Maman is going to give Imogen a little bonus, maybe a few $1,000s. She can finally go to a mall and buy clothes that weren't donated to a shelter. Right, Maman?" "We will see," Beatrice said benevolently, drunk on potential wealth. "If she behaves, we have to be charitable to those less fortunate, even if they are family." "Thank you, Mother," I murmured, backing out of the room. "You are too kind." I walked into the hallway, my heart pounding a steady, cold rhythm. They were dissecting the bear before they had even caught it. They were spending money that didn't exist. I checked my phone. It was 5:59. The doorbell rang. It was a heavy, authoritative sound that silenced the chatter in the bedroom. "He is here," Beatrice squealed. "Imogen, get the door. Hurry!" I ran down the stairs and opened the heavy oak door. Arthur stood there. He looked magnificent. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, carrying a sleek black Halliburton case, and wearing a pair of rimless glasses that made him look like a Swiss banker. He didn't look like a locksmith. He looked like a cleaner for the mob. "Good evening," he said, his voice clipped and professional. He looked at me without a flicker of recognition. "I am the specialist." "They are upstairs," I whispered. "Showtime." We walked up the stairs in silence. When we entered the bedroom, the air was thick with tension and expensive perfume. Everyone turned to look at Arthur. He commanded the room instantly. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. He just walked straight to the safe, set his case down on the floor, and stared at the dial. "A Titan Imperial," Arthur said, his voice low. 1925, manganese steel alloy, glass relocker, a serious piece of engineering. "Can you open it?" Beatrice asked, her voice breathless. Arthur turned to look at her, adjusting his glasses. "I can open anything, madam. The question is time, and silence." He knelt down and opened his case. Inside, nestled in custom foam, were an array of tools that looked more medical than mechanical. There were stethoscopes, digital probes, and fiber optic scopes. "I need absolute silence," Arthur announced, standing up. "This lock operates on gravity tumblers. I need to hear the pins drop. If anyone speaks, if anyone moves, I lose the count, and I have to start over. Is that understood?" Beatrice nodded frantically. "Yes, silence. Everyone, shut up." The room fell dead quiet. Even Marcus stopped swirling his ice. Arthur put on the stethoscope and pressed the diaphragm against the steel door. Right next to the dial. He closed his eyes. He began to turn the dial slowly. Click, click, click. I stood in the far corner, near the door. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pressed the record button on my phone. The microphone was sensitive. It would pick up everything. Arthur spun the dial left, then right. He frowned, shaking his head. "Tricky," he muttered, just loud enough for them to hear. "The second tumbler is sticky. It has not been turned in decades." Beatrice was wringing her hands so hard her knuckles were white. She leaned toward Mr. Sterling, the lawyer. "What if," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, "what if there is a will in there?" Mr. Sterling leaned in close, his eyes fixed on the safe. "We discussed this. Beatrice, the will I drafted 5 years ago is the only one on record. If there is another document in there, it is handwritten, unwitnessed. But what if it is dated?" Beatrice hissed. "What if she wrote it right before she died? You know how paranoid she was. She knew about the money I took." "Keep your voice down," Sterling warned, glancing at Arthur's back. "Listen to me. If there is a will in there, we destroy it, immediately. No one knows it exists, as far as the court is concerned. Josephine was mentally incompetent in her final year. Any document she wrote can be challenged as the ravings of a senile woman. We will say she was confused. We have the medical records. Remember the doctor I paid to sign off on her dementia diagnosis?" "Yes," Beatrice breathed. "Yes, you are right. She was crazy. Everyone knows she was crazy." "And Imogen?" Sterling asked. "She is the only other heir," Beatrice scoffed quietly. "Imogen, look at her. She is a mouse. She doesn't have the spine to sue us. And she certainly doesn't have the money to hire a lawyer. Even if she found a will, I would bury her in legal fees until she starved. She is nothing. She is just an unfortunate accident of genetics." "Good," Sterling whispered. "Then we are safe. We take the bearer bonds, we pay off the bank, and we burn the paper. Clean slate." My hand tightened around the phone in my pocket. I had it. I had the confession. I had them admitting to fraud, to bribery of a doctor, to conspiracy to destroy legal documents. It was enough to send them both to prison for 10 years. But prison was too easy. I wanted them to feel the loss first. Arthur suddenly stopped turning the dial. He straightened up and took off the stethoscope. He turned to face the room. "I have the combination," he said. The air in the room seemed to electrify. Beatrice let out a little squeak. Henderson, the banker, leaned forward in his chair. "Open it," Marcus said, his voice greedy. "One moment," Arthur said, raising a hand. "My fee, as discussed in the email. $10,000, payable immediately upon opening." "Yes, yes," Beatrice cried. "I will write you a check. Just open the damn door." Arthur nodded. He turned back to the safe. He reached out with both hands. He spun the dial, left to 4, right to 18, Left to 32. I held my breath. This was it. The moment I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. There was a loud, distinct clunk from inside the door. The heavy steel bolts retracted. The sound was deep and final, like a tomb opening. Arthur grabbed the heavy brass handle. He looked at Beatrice one last time. "Madam," he said, "your destiny awaits." He pulled the handle down and swung the massive steel door open. Beatrice lunged forward. She didn't walk. She ran. She practically shoved Arthur out of the way to get to the open vault. Serafina was right behind her. Phone recording. Marcus and Sterling crowded in. They stared into the dark cavern of the safe. "Where is it?" Beatrice screamed. Her voice cracked. It wasn't a scream of joy. It was a scream of horror. "Where is the gold? Where are the bonds?" I stepped forward from my corner. I could see inside the safe over their shoulders. It was empty. Well, not entirely empty. Sitting in the exact center of the metal shelf, illuminated by the beam of Marcus's phone light, was a single, battered leather box, and on top of it, a thick cream-colored envelope. "What is this?" Beatrice shrieked. Grabbing the envelope, she tore it open with savage claws. "This is paper, I want the money." She pulled out a document. It was bound in blue legal backing, and behind it, a USB drive. "What is this?" She turned to Sterling, thrusting the papers at him. "Read it. Is it a bond? Is it a stock certificate?" Sterling took the papers. His face went gray. He looked at the header. He looked at the signature at the bottom. He looked at the notary seal, embossed and official. "It is a will," he whispered, "a last will and testament, dated 2 days before she died." "Burn it," Beatrice yelled, grabbing at the paper. "Burn it now." We agreed. "I wouldn't do that," I said. My voice was not the voice of the mouse anymore. It was clear, resonant, and cold as ice. I walked into the center of the room. "That document is a certified copy," I said. "The original is filed with the probate court in New York City, and the video on that drive, it is already uploaded to a cloud server that will automatically email a link to the district attorney if I don't enter a code every 24 hours. Beatrice froze. She turned slowly to look at me. It was the look of a predator realizing that the rabbit it was chasing was actually a wolf. "You," she whispered. "You knew." "I knew," I said. "And Beatrice, you might want to sit down. You look like you're about to lose everything." The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum created by the sudden, violent collapse of expectation. The heavy steel door of the Titan safe stood open like a gaping mouth, but instead of the glitter of gold bars or the crisp stacks of bearer bonds Beatrice had hallucinated, there was only darkness and dust. Resting on the center shelf, illuminated by the harsh beam of the flashlight, sat a solitary, battered leather document box and a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. Beatrice stared at it, her face a mask of incomprehension that rapidly crumbled into fury. She lunged. It was a feral movement, a desperate grab for salvation. She snatched the envelope from the shelf, her nails tearing at the heavy paper. "No!" she shrieked, ripping the wax seal apart. "Where is it? Where is the money?" She shook the envelope upside down. A sheaf of papers fell out, sliding across the polished floor. No cash, no checks, just legal documents bound in blue backing. Beatrice fell to her knees, scrabbling at the papers. She grabbed the top document, her eyes scanning the text wildly. "What is this legalese? Where are the numbers?" I stepped out of the shadows. The time for hiding was over. The time for the mouse costume was done. I reached up and pulled the hair tie from my messy bun, letting my hair fall loose. I straightened my spine, shedding the posture of the beaten servant I had worn for 5 years. "Don't touch the evidence, Beatrice," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. It was the voice I used when negotiating with museum curators, the voice of authority, of someone who knows exactly what something is worth. Beatrice froze. She looked up at me from the floor, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "What did you call me?" she hissed. I am your mother. How dare you speak to me like that? You lost the right to that title the day you sold my childhood for a pair of earrings, I said coldly. I walked toward her, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood. Stand up. You are embarrassing yourself. Serafina gaped at me. Imogen, what is wrong with you? Have you lost your mind? On the contrary, I said, looking at my sister with pity. I am the only one here who is seeing things clearly. I turned to Arthur. He was standing by the safe, watching the scene with the impassive expression of a butler witnessing a murder. I gave him a small, imperceptible nod. Arthur reached into his case and pulled out a portable projector. He set it on the vanity table and pointed it at the blank white wall above the fireplace. He plugged in the USB drive that had been inside the leather box. What is he doing? Mister, Sterling demanded, stepping forward. You cannot just play unauthorized media. This is a private family matter. Sit down, Sterling, Arthur said. His voice was no longer the clipped tone of a servant. It was deep, commanding. Unless you want to be added as a co-conspirator to the fraud charge. Sterling blanched and sank back into his chair. A beam of light cut through the dim room. A grainy image flickered onto the wall. It was Grandma Jo. A collective gasp went through the room. She was sitting in her bed, propped up by pillows. She looked frail, her skin paper thin, but her eyes, those sharp, intelligent blue eyes, were blazing with life. She was looking directly into the camera. My name is Josephine Blackwood, she began. Her voice was weak, raspy, but every word was enunciated with deliberate clarity. Today is March 18th, 2020. I am of sound mind and body, despite what my daughter and her paid doctors might try to tell you. Beatrice made a choking sound. She tried to lunge for the projector, but Marcus held her back, his eyes glued to the screen. I am recording this message, Grandma continued, because I know that once I am gone, the wolves will come. Beatrice, I know you are watching this. I know you have been waiting for me to die so you can turn my life's work into cash for your vanity. On the screen, Grandma leaned forward slightly. You think I didn't see you stealing from my accounts? You think I didn't notice the missing jewelry? You treated me like a broken ATM. Not a mother. Beatrice was shaking her head violently. Lies. She was crazy. Turn it off. And Serafina, Grandma said, shifting her gaze as if she could see her granddaughter through time. You are just as bad, empty, vain, a parasite feeding on a host. Serafina let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. But Imogen, Grandma's face softened. A genuine smile touched her lips. My little shadow, my brave, quiet girl, you are the only one worthy of the name Blackwood. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the projector fan. Therefore, Grandma declared, her voice gathering strength, I hereby revoke all previous wills. I leave nothing to Beatrice Blackwood. I leave nothing to Serafina Blackwood. I leave my entire estate, including the Blackwood Manor property, the contents of this house, and the sum of $2 million in liquid cash currently held in the blind trust account number 4819 at the Geneva Private Bank. Solely and exclusively to my granddaughter, Imogen Brightwell. Beatrice screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure agony. $2 million. It was mine. It was supposed to be mine. Furthermore, Grandma added, I have instructed my executors, the firm of Cromwell Vance in New York, to only release these funds once Imogen has personally retrieved this recording. If this safe is opened by anyone else, by force or by trickery, the funds are to be donated entirely to the Cat Charity of Newport. The video flickered and went black. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Beatrice was on the floor, staring at the blank wall as if she could will the money back into existence. Mr. Henderson, the banker, stood up slowly. He looked at Beatrice with disgust. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, adjusting his tie. It appears our business is concluded, since you are not the owner of this property. You have no authority to negotiate its debt. I will be dealing with the legal heir from now on. He turned to me and gave a small, respectful bow. Ms. Brightwell, my card. If you wish to discuss the mortgage, the bank is very willing to work with a client of your standing. I took the card. Thank you. Mr. Henderson, I will be in touch. Please see yourself out. Beatrice scrambled to her feet. Her face was mottled red and white. You? She pointed a shaking finger at me. You planned this. You knew you tricked me. I didn't trick you, Beatrice, I said calmly. I just let you be yourself. You dug your own grave with your greed. I just handed you the shovel. Give me that will. She lunged for the papers on the floor. I was faster. I stepped on the document, pinning it to the floor with my boot. I told you, don't touch the evidence. Evidence, mister? Sterling squeaked. Now, Imogen, let's not be hasty. Surely we can come to an arrangement. A family arrangement. We don't need to involve the courts. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. An arrangement like the one you made 5 years ago when you helped her forge a will to cut me out. Oh, don't look surprised. Sterling, did you think Grandma didn't keep records, that box? I pointed to the leather case still in the safe. Is full of bank statements. It traces every penny Beatrice stole, and it traces the $50,000 payment she made to you the week after the funeral. Sterling's face went white. He backed away toward the door. I have to go. I have a meeting. Run, Sterling, I said. But you can't outrun a subpoena. My lawyers have already filed the paperwork. I looked around the room. The power had shifted. It was palpable. 5 minutes ago, I was the servant. Now, I was the queen of the castle. Beatrice was a sobbing mess on the floor. Serafina was a terrified child. Marcus was looking at the door, calculating his exit strategy. I walked over to the safe and picked up the leather box. It was heavy. It felt good in my hands. I turned to Arthur. Thank you. Arthur, you can pack up now. Arthur nodded and began expertly disassembling his tools. I looked down at Beatrice. Get up, I said. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Imogen, please, you can't do this. I'm your mother. We're family. $2 million. We can share it. We can fix the house. We can be a family again. A family? I raised an eyebrow. You didn't want a family. Beatrice, you wanted a bank account, and now that the account is closed, you suddenly remember we're related. I made mistakes, she wailed. I was stressed. I did it for us. You did it for you, I corrected. And now, you are going to pay for it, not with money. You don't have any. You are going to pay with the one thing you value more than anything else. I leaned in close, so only she could hear. Your reputation. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet drapes. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. This is my house now, I said, not turning around. And I have some very specific ideas about who is allowed to live in it. The projection of my grandmother's face faded from the wall, leaving a rectangular afterimage that seemed to burn into the retina. But Beatrice was not looking at the wall anymore. She was looking at the ruin of her life. And her reaction was not remorse. It was a violent, cornered rejection of reality. It is a fake, Beatrice screamed, her voice shredding the heavy silence of the room. She scrambled to her feet, her face twisted into a mask of ugly, desperate denial. She pointed a trembling finger at the blank wall, then at me. You doctored it. You used some computer trickery. That is not her. My mother was senile. She did not know what day of the week it was, let alone how to change a will. She whirled on Mr. Sterling, grabbing the lapels of his expensive jacket. Tell them she was incompetent. You have the doctor's notes. You have the signatures. I am the only daughter. I am the only one who cared for her. This is a fraud. Beatrice, please, Sterling stammered, trying to peel her hands off his suit. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. The video, It seems very specific. It is AI, Beatrice shrieked, grasping at buzzwords she barely understood. It is a deep fake. That old woman loved me. She would never do this to me. She anticipated this, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. Arthur, play the rest. Beatrice froze. The rest. Arthur pressed a key on his laptop. The projector hummed to life again. The image of Grandma Jo reappeared. She had leaned back against her pillows, looking tired, but the steel in her eyes was harder than ever. I know what you are doing right now. Beatrice, Grandma's voice filled the room, ghostly and knowing. You are screaming. You are calling me crazy. You are telling your lawyer that I lost my mind years ago. You are playing the victim. On the screen, Grandma reached for a glass of water, her hand shaking. She took a sip and set it down. When she looked back at the camera, her expression was one of profound sorrow mixed with cold judgment. But I was not crazy when I checked the balance of my dedicated nursing care account on January 15th, Grandma said. I was not crazy when I saw that $500,000 was missing. $500,000. Beatrice, that was the money meant for my hospice care. It was the money meant to ensure I did not die in pain. Beatrice made a sound like a wounded animal, a high, thin, keening noise. She clapped her hands over her ears, shaking her head violently. No, no, no. I called the bank, the video continued. They told me you authorized the transfer. You used your power of attorney. You told them it was for emergency medical equipment, but I never saw any equipment. So, I hired a private investigator. Grandma held up a piece of paper to the camera. I know where the money went. It didn't go to doctors. It went to the renovation of your pool house. It went to a trip to the Maldives for Serafina. It went to a deposit on a Porsche that you crashed 2 months later. Liar. Beatrice screamed at the screen. I needed that break. I was stressed. Taking care of you was killing me. You stole the money that was supposed to ease my dying days, Grandma said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than any shout. And that is why you get nothing, not because I am cruel, but because you have already taken your inheritance. You spent it on vanity while I lay in this bed in pain. You left me nothing but my dignity, so I am using it to cut you out. The video ended. The screen went black for the final time. It is a lie, Beatrice whispered, swaying on her feet. It is all a lie. She made it up. There is no proof. I walked over to the table where I had placed the leather box. I opened the lid. It wasn't full of gold. It was full of paper. I reached in and pulled out a thick stack of stapled documents. No proof, I asked. I tossed the first bundle onto the floor at Beatrice's feet. It landed with a heavy slap. Exhibit A, I said, my voice clinical. Bank of America records, dated February 2020, withdrawal of $50,000, memo medical expenses, corresponding credit card charge on your Platinum Visa the same day, $50,000 to Van Cleef and Arpels. I tossed another bundle. Exhibit B, March, withdrawal of $75,000. Memo specialist consultation. Corresponding charge. The Four Seasons Resort, Bora Bora, 2 weeks, Serafina's birthday trip. I looked at my sister. Serafina was pale, her mouth hanging open. She looked from the papers on the floor to me, terror dawning in her eyes. You told me Grandma paid for that trip, Serafina whispered. You said she wanted me to have a break. She lied, I said, throwing another stack down. She stole from a dying woman to buy your affection, Serafina, and you were too self-absorbed to ask why Grandma was eating generic soup while you were drinking champagne on a beach. I turned back to Beatrice. I have 5 years of records here. Mother, every time Grandma needed medication, you bought shoes. Every time she needed a nurse, you renovated a room. It is all here. The forensic accountant I hired spent 3 months cross-referencing these. It is bulletproof. It is grand larceny. It is elder abuse. And it is fraud. Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, let out a strangled noise. He backed away until he hit the wall. I did not know, he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. Beatrice told me the funds were legitimate gifts. I was misled. I represent the estate, not her personal actions. You notarized the fake will. Sterling, I said without looking at him, you are just as guilty, but right now, you are the least of my concerns. I turned my attention to Mr. Henderson, the banker. He was standing by the window, frantically typing on his phone. He looked up as I approached, his face a mask of professional panic. Mr. Henderson, I said, I assume you are updating your risk assessment. Miss Brightwell, Henderson said, his voice tight. Given the revelations regarding the misappropriation of funds and the potential legal battles, the bank's position is precarious. We cannot accept a repayment plan from Mrs. Blackwood. The collateral is compromised. We will have to proceed with the seizure immediately. The house will be auctioned. Beatrice looked up from the floor, hope flickering in her eyes. Yes, yes, seize it, take the house. If I can't have it, nobody can sell it to strangers. I don't care. She looked at me with pure venom. You think you won. Imogen, you think you get the manor, the bank owns it, they will sell it to the highest bidder, and you will be on the street just like us. I smiled. It was a slow, dangerous smile that made Henderson pause. Actually, I said, reaching into the back pocket of my dirty jeans, Mr. Henderson is a little behind on his email. I pulled out a folded piece of paper and smoothed it out on the vanity table. I am not unemployed, Mother, I said, my voice steady, and I am not poor. For the last 5 years, I have been the sole owner of Ethelgard Restorations. You probably haven't heard of it. We don't advertise in the tabloids you read. We serve the kind of clients who own islands, not timeshares. Serafina blinked. Ethelgard. That company that fixed the Vatican archives? I saw them on the news. That is you. That is me, I said. And business has been very, very good. I tapped the paper on the table. This morning, at 9 o'clock, my holding company purchased the debt on Blackwood Manor from your bank's distressed asset division. I didn't pay it off. Beatrice, I bought the note. Mr. Henderson stopped typing. His phone slowly lowered to his side. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and sudden, dawning respect. You are the principal behind Ethelgard Holdings. I am, I said. Check your internal memos. Mr. Henderson, the transfer cleared at noon. You don't hold the mortgage anymore. I do. I turned to Beatrice. The blood had drained from her face so completely she looked like a corpse. Do you understand what that means, Mother? I asked softly. It means I am not just the heir to the estate. I am your creditor. I own the debt you racked up. I own the 3 mortgages you took out. I own the interest you failed to pay. You bought the house, Serafina stammered. But with what money? It is millions of dollars. From the people who pay for my talent, I said, picking up a heavy stack of the financial records and dropping them back into the box with a loud thud. The talent you and Mother spent 20 years telling me I didn't have. While you were playing socialite, Serafina, I was building an empire. While you were faking a lifestyle, I was restoring history. And today, I used the money I earned to buy the roof over your head. No, Beatrice whispered. This isn't real. You are the invisible one. You are the failure. The failure just foreclosed on you, I said. The room was spinning for them. I could see it. The reality was crashing down too fast for them to process. The invisible daughter wasn't just back. She was the landlord. She was the bank. She was the judge, jury, and executioner. I heard a soft click from the doorway. I turned my head. Marcus, the slick developer, the man who had promised to turn the manor into a resort, was quietly turning the handle of the bedroom door. He had his shoes in his hand, trying to sneak out in his socks. Going somewhere, Marcus? I asked. He froze. He looked at me, then at Serafina, then back at the door. The charm was gone. The arrogance was gone. He looked like exactly what he was, a rat fleeing a ship that had already hit the bottom. I have a call, Marcus muttered. Business. Big deal in Miami. Gotta go. Marcus, Serafina cried out, standing up. What are you doing? Tell her off. Tell her we are going to build the resort. Marcus let out a short, harsh laugh. Resort. Are you kidding me? Babe, look around. You are broke. Your mom is a crook. And your sister is a shark who just ate you alive. There is no resort. There never was. I was just here for the commission. But you love me, Serafina whimpered. I love the idea of $10 million, Marcus said, opening the door. Good luck with the eviction. You are going to need it. He slipped out into the hallway. We heard his footsteps running down the stairs, followed by the slam of the front door. Serafina collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in the silk throw, sobbing with the heartbroken wail of a child who has just realized the world doesn't revolve around her. Beatrice didn't look at Serafina. She didn't look at the door. She stared at me. Her eyes were black holes of hate. You planned this, she hissed. You came here in those rags. You pretended to be weak. You let me humiliate you. You let me scrub floors. Why? Why didn't you just tell us? Because you wouldn't have listened, I said, walking toward her until I was towering over her kneeling form. And because I wanted to see if there was any part of you that was worth saving, I gave you every chance. Beatrice, I spent 5 days in this house giving you opportunities to be a mother, to ask how I was, to offer me a glass of water, to show a single ounce of humanity. I leaned down, my face inches from hers. But you didn't, I whispered. You are exactly who Grandma said you were, and now, you are exactly where you deserve to be. I stood up and checked my watch. It is 7 o'clock, I announced to the room. My security team will be here in 1 hour. I suggest you start packing. And Beatrice, don't take the silverware. I have an inventory list, and I will prosecute for theft. The reality of my declaration hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. I had just told Beatrice Blackwood, the woman who believed she was the Queen of Newport, that she was trespassing on my property. The silence that followed was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a dam about to burst. Beatrice did not scream immediately. Instead, she crumbled. It was a terrifying transformation to watch. The haughty, imperious socialite dissolved, and in her place stood a desperate, aging woman, terrified of the dark. She threw herself at my feet, her hands grasping the hem of my dirty jeans. Imogen, baby, please, she wailed, the tears carving jagged tracks through her thick foundation. You cannot do this. You cannot throw me out. I am your mother. I gave you life. I fed you. I clothed you. Does that mean nothing? I looked down at her. Her grip was tight, frantic. You fed me scraps, I said, my voice devoid of pity. You clothed me in donations. And yes, you gave me life, but you spent the next 28 years trying to make me wish I didn't have it. I was trying to make you strong, she sobbed, switching tactics instantly. The world is hard. Imogen, I had to be tough on you. I knew you didn't have Serafina's charm or her looks, so I had to teach you resilience. I did it for you. Everything I did was for you. Stop it, I said. Just stop. You are not a martyr. Beatrice, you are a narcissist who got caught. She let go of my legs and scrambled backward, her face twisting from pathetic to vicious in a heartbeat. The mask of the victim fell away, revealing the monster underneath. You ungrateful little wretch, she spat. I will sue you. I will tie this property up in litigation for decades. You will never step foot in this house as the owner. I have rights, squatters' rights, tenancy rights. You cannot just kick me out. Actually, I can, I said. The foreclosure laws in Rhode Island are quite specific when the debt is purchased by a private entity and the occupants have committed documented fraud against the previous estate holder. My lawyers filed the emergency eviction order 3 hours ago. A judge signed it at 4:30. You are lying, she screamed. You are bluffing." "I never bluff," I said. "And Beatrice, you are fighting over pennies. You are so focused on the house and the $2 million that you miss the real punchline." I walked back to the open safe. The leather box was still sitting there, open. I reached past the bank records I had thrown at her feet and pulled out the false bottom of the box. Underneath the paperwork lay a thick stack of heavy, intricate paper certificates. They were green and gold, engraved with the kind of detail that is no longer used in modern printing. I held the stack up. It was 3 inches thick. "Do you know what these are?" I asked. Beatrice squinted, wiping her eyes. "Paper, more paper." "These," I said, fanning them out, "are United States Treasury bearer bonds, issue date 1935. My great-grandfather bought them during the Depression because he didn't trust banks. Grandma Jo found them in the attic 40 years ago and put them in this safe." I took a step closer so she could see the denominations. $10,000 each, I said, "and there are 500 of them." Beatrice stopped breathing. Her mouth fell open. She did the math in her head. 500 times 10,000. Five million, she whispered. "Face value," I corrected. "But these are 1935 bonds. Beatrice, they have been accruing interest for 90 years. The coupons have never been clipped." I had Arthur run the calculation based on the serial numbers. I let the silence stretch, heavy and cruel. "They are worth roughly $25 million, I said softly. "And unlike a bank account, bearer bonds have no name on them. Whoever holds the physical paper owns the money. If you had just treated me with a single ounce of kindness, if you had just opened this safe as a family, we would be splitting $27 million today. You could have had your Porsche. You could have had your trips." Beatrice made a sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of a soul breaking under the weight of regret. She reached out a shaking hand toward the bonds. "Give them to me," she whispered. "Please, just one. Just one bond. Imogen, please, I will disappear. I will never bother you again. Just give me one." I looked at the bonds, then at her. I slowly lowered the stack and placed them back into the leather box. I closed the lid with a definitive snap. "No," I said. "Why?" she screamed, clawing at the air. "You have so much. You don't need it all. Why are you so greedy?" "It is not about greed," I said. "It is about the lesson. You told me Grandma left me nothing to teach me independence. Well, Mother, I am returning the favor. I am leaving you nothing. Consider it a lesson in humility." I checked my watch again. "Your hour started 5 minutes ago," I said. "You have 55 minutes. You may take clothing and personal toiletries. You may not take jewelry, art, electronics, or furniture. Those are assets of the estate, which I now own. If you try to smuggle anything out, I will have you arrested for theft." "You can't be serious," Serafina whimpered from the bed. "Where are we supposed to go?" "I hear the Motel 6 on the highway has vacancies," I said. "It is very affordable. You might even be able to get a job there. Serafina, I hear they are looking for maids." That was the breaking point. Beatrice snapped. The logic, the fear, the calculation had all vanished, replaced by pure, red-hot rage. She let out a feral shriek and launched herself at me. Her fingers were curved like talons, aiming for my face. "I will kill you," she screamed. "I will kill you, you witch." I didn't flinch. I didn't move. 2 massive shapes materialized from the hallway. I hadn't introduced them, but they had been waiting just out of sight since Arthur arrived. My security detail. A large hand grabbed Beatrice by the back of her designer dress, halting her mid-air. She flailed, kicking and scratching, but the bodyguard held her as easily as if she were a toddler. "That is assault," the bodyguard said, his voice deep and bored. "Ms. Brightwell, do you want to press charges?" I looked at my mother, dangling there, her dignity completely gone. "Not yet," I said. "I want them off my property first." Heavy footsteps echoed on the stairs. A moment later, a man in a tan uniform walked into the bedroom. He was older, with a weary face and a badge that gleamed in the light. Sheriff Miller. He had known my family for 30 years. He had known Grandma Jo. And he had always looked at Beatrice with a quiet disdain. "Evening, Imogen," the sheriff said, tipping his hat to me. He ignored Beatrice completely. "I got the order from the judge. Eviction notice, effective immediately, breach of contract, fraud, and hostile occupancy." He turned to Beatrice, who was being lowered to her feet by the bodyguard. "Beatrice," the sheriff said, "you have been riding high on borrowed money for a long time. Ride is over. You have got 40 minutes to pack a bag, or my deputies will escort you out with nothing but the clothes on your back." "Sheriff, you can't do this," Beatrice pleaded, smoothing her dress. "We are friends. I donated to your election campaign." "That check bounced. Beatrice," the sheriff said dryly. "Now move." The next 40 minutes were a blur of chaotic misery. I stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, watching them scurry. Serafina was throwing designer clothes into a Louis Vuitton suitcase, sobbing uncontrollably. Beatrice was trying to shove a silver candelabra into her purse, but the sheriff saw her. "Put it back, Beatrice," he barked. "That is theft." She dropped it with a clang, cursing under her breath. When the time was up, they looked like refugees from a fashion show gone wrong. They dragged their suitcases down the grand staircase, their heels clicking a mournful rhythm. I followed them down, step by step, the mistress of the house seeing out the unwanted guests. We reached the front door. The cool night air rushed in. Outside, a patrol car was parked in the driveway, its blue lights flashing silently against the stone facade of the manor. Beatrice stopped on the threshold. She turned to look at me one last time. Her eyes were swollen, her hair a mess. She looked old. For the first time, she looked her age. "You will rot in hell for this," she hissed. "You are a cold, heartless monster." "I learned from the best," I replied. Serafina pushed past her mother, lugging a heavy bag. She turned and glared at Beatrice. "This is your fault," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You said you had it handled. You said we were rich. You ruined my life. I hate you." "Serafina, wait," Beatrice cried, reaching for her. "Don't touch me," Serafina yelled, dragging her bag toward the sheriff's car. "I am not going to the motel with you. I am calling Dad." "Your father hasn't spoken to us in 10 years, Beatrice shouted back. "I don't care. Anyone is better than you." I watched them, the golden child and the doting mother, tearing each other apart the moment the money ran out. It was pathetic. It was inevitable. "Ladies," the sheriff said, stepping forward. "Time to go. You are blocking the driveway." Beatrice looked at me again. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to curse me again, perhaps to beg, but she saw the look in my eyes. It was a look of absolute finality. There was no purchase there, no emotion she could manipulate. She turned and walked out into the night. Her shoulders slumped, defeated. I stepped onto the porch. "Sheriff," I called out. He turned back. "Make sure they are off the island," I said. "If I see them near the gate, I am calling you." "Understood, Ms. Brightwell," he said. "Enjoy your night." He got into his car. Beatrice and Serafina were arguing in the back seat of a taxi that had just pulled up behind the patrol car. I watched as they loaded their bags. I watched as the taxi pulled away, its taillights fading into the darkness of the long driveway. They were gone. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant crash of the ocean against the cliffs. The air smelled of salt and rain. It smelled clean. I stepped back inside and took hold of the heavy brass handle of the front door. It was solid, cool to the touch. I pushed. The massive oak door swung shut with a resounding thud that echoed through the entire house. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I was alone. The house was silent, but it wasn't the stagnant silence of the tomb anymore. It was a waiting silence, a pregnant silence. It was a blank canvas. I walked back through the foyer, past the spot where I used to scrub the floor on my knees. I walked into the living room. It was messy, cluttered with the debris of their panic-overturned chairs, empty champagne glasses, discarded papers. I ignored it all. I walked straight to the library. I found the bottle of wine I had brought with me, a 1982 Bordeaux that I'd been saving for a special occasion. I found a crystal glass one that Beatrice hadn't managed to break or steal. I uncorked the bottle. The wine was dark, rich, the color of blood. I poured a glass. I walked to the fireplace in the library, where a small fire I had lit earlier was still crackling. Above the mantel hung the only portrait Beatrice hadn't taken down, a painting of Grandma Josephine from her youth. She was standing in the garden, holding a book, looking off into the distance with that sharp, knowing smile. I sank into her leather wingback chair. It still smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. I swirled the wine in the glass, watching the legs run down the side. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but beneath it, a bedrock of peace. I had done it. I had executed her judgment. I had avenged the little girl who was made to feel invisible. I raised the glass toward the painting. "To independence," I whispered to the empty room. I took a sip. The wine was perfect, complex, deep, with a finish that lingered. There was no forgiveness in my heart. I didn't feel the need for it. Forgiveness is for people who are sorry. Beatrice and Serafina were not sorry. They were just sorry they lost. Justice did not require forgiveness. It only required balance. And the scales were finally level. I leaned back, closing my eyes, listening to the fire pop and hiss. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. I would restore this house. I would bring back the gardens. I would fill the library with books again. I would turn Blackwood Manor into the sanctuary Grandma Jo had always wanted it to be. But for tonight, I would just sit in the quiet, the victorious, expensive, beautiful quiet. The screen fades to black. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey of justice, and I hope you felt the satisfaction of the ending as much as I did writing it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet room, or maybe on your drive home? Drop a comment below with your location, and let me know your thoughts on Imogen's revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Healing Drama Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who need a little vindication in their lives. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.